hindrance was the chronic lack of funds, making us heavily reliant on international lenders. But now, our problem, and I must say that this is a rather good problem, seems to be that government has a lot of excess money. While on the one hand, government was able to collect more taxes and increase the national budget allocation for infrastructure, government, on the other hand, has ironically underspent. Moreover, in our efforts to spur national infrastructure development, an intermediate issue has evolved into a huge bottleneck that likewise hampers the desired pace of our implementation. It is the problem of right-of-way acquisition. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege as chairman of your Committee on Public Works to sponsor Senate Bill number 3004, or an act strengthening the process of acquiring the right-of-way for national government infrastructure projects, repealing for this purpose Republic Act number 8974, otherwise known as an act to facilitate the acquisition of right-of-way, site, or location for national government infrastructure projects, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, under Committee Report number 292. Delays in right-of-way acquisition involving infrastructure projects were precisely sought to be addressed by the enactment of RA number 8974 back in the year 2000. But 15 years on, we now realize that the old problem has become more complex than Congress had ever imagined it would become. Back then, right-of-way acquisition was envisioned as an easy and convenient process that could be concluded by mere payment to the landowner of just compensation. But urbanization and rising real estate values have made the exercise of the inherent power of eminent domain more contentious, thereby making the negotiations more tedious and complicated, and the process quite long. In the view of landowners, what is supposed to be the ideal just compensation, as guaranteed by the Constitution, has been reduced to a mere token compensation and worse, perceived as unjust. Because of disagreements as to the sale price, which more often than not falls below the current market value of the property, the landowner naturally is constrained to reject the offer of the government. Thus, the government is impelled to improve its offer as close to the prevailing market price as possible. However, for lack of mechanism under the law, implementing agencies have been reluctant to pursue this course of action for fear of a COA disallowance or of an ombudsman complaint. Moreover, the agencies do not have in-house appraisers, and the current law does not expressly authorize the commissioning of third-party appraisers. Hence, both the landowner and the government would rather fight it out in court rather than lose the property through an unfair bargain or risk administrative charges, respectively. In about 90% of right-of-way acquisition cases, the landowners and the agencies found that it was expedient to let the courts decide the matter via an expropriation case filed by government. However, the expropriation process entails a long-drawn litigation battle that frequently requires more than a year to terminate. In fact, some cases have been litigated and have reached more than 10 years. Needless to say, in the final analysis, it is the public that suffers. Government's infrastructure plans are not brought to fruition to the detriment of the public welfare and convenience and to the building of our nation. Hence, this bill acknowledges the time is of the essence in implementing a government infrastructure project. More than anything else, this bill prioritizes efficiency and speed of the acquisition of right-of-way. Recognized as the game changer in the process is to have the landowner agree to the first offer of the government as soon as possible to avoid lengthy negotiations and court proceedings, and ultimately save precious time for the government to accomplish the project in accordance within its time frame. Hence, as a mutually beneficial solution, and as a matter of policy, negotiated sale is preferred and made more attractive as a mode of acquisition, wherein the current fair market value of the land shall be immediately made the basis of the negotiated sale price, net of all transfer-related taxes. Aside from the prioritization of the mode of negotiated sale, This bill seeks to address delays in the acquisition process by providing clearer guidelines, notably in the appraisal of values, in the procedure for expropriation, acquisition of easements, and in the appropriation of relevant funds for the implementing agencies. Despite all the delays in our infrastructure development, our economy has remained strong. Despite criticism of our infrastructure development, we have reached positive investment grade ratings from international agencies. This means that we have yet to show our full economic potential driven by a strong infrastructure development. With the surplus savings that we have accumulated and underspent, there is neither reason nor excuse now to invest wisely and efficiently on infrastructure development that will stimulate economic activity, reduce unnecessary costs of doing business, foster productivity and public convenience, generate employment, increase revenues and income, and ensure the greatest good for the greatest number. Government has the vision, the plans, as well as the funds. The private sector has the capability and expertise. This proposal is on the priority list not only of the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, but also of the leadership of our esteemed Senate President. Speaking in behalf of this august chamber, this committee is of the considered view that with one voice, we should respond by aligning and attuning our legislative targets towards the same direction and improve right away our existing right-of-way, or RA 8974, by enacting this important piece of legislation. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Senator Marcos, for that sponsorship. Just one question from the chair. Is a similar measure pending in the House, and if so, what is the status?
I know that there is a similar bill in the House which has already been passed.
Okay. Well, we're all interested in having this passed as soon as possible. This bill is necessary. It's not controversial. May we know if the sponsor can respond? Is there any substantial difference between the House version and the committee report?
Not substantial. I think we would have to refer to any differences as just questions of style and language.
Would the appropriate time, if it is not a substantial difference, would the committee consider adopting the version of the House?
Most certainly, Mr. President. We will just have a second look at the final version that was passed by the House. And again, if it is not substantially different, we certainly appreciate the urgency of the necessity of this bill to be passed as urgently as possible. And we would be quite willing to adopt, so long as there are no fundamental differences. I do not believe that there are, but again, it would be just judicious for us to take a second look, and if possible, we will adopt.
Yes, the chair is pointing this out because given the fact that once we pass the budget, the Department of Public Works would usually immediately award projects, and we have a ban on awards of projects in view of the coming election. So the chair is quite keen on being able to pass this bill as soon as we can, if there are no substantial differences. And as I said, this kind of bill is really for the good of our infrastructure program and should not invite much of a controversy.
I do not believe so, because in my own research and discussions with our officers and officials in the Department of Public Works, when asked what are the main problems you run into, it is unanimous. Every single one says the first problem we have to fix is the right-of-way, and speed up the acquisition of right-of-way, because there are many downstream problems that arise from the delays that occur. And so I think that we are of one mind on that, Mr. President.
Under these premises, would the sponsor kindly consider putting this on the calendar again on Wednesday, so that Wednesday, December 9, and see if we can fast-track the measure without prejudice to our colleagues raising questions if there are, and hopefully if we can approve this on December 18 before we go on recess.
Certainly, Mr. President, I have no problem with that. I have no objection to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. From the chair that there are no reservations for interpolation on this measure.
In that case,
Duly noted.
Mr. President, in that case, I move to close the period of interpellations.
Any objections? Hearing on period of interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is in order.
Mr. President, there are no committee amendments to be proposed.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of committee amendments.
Committee amendments terminated. Marcos is recognized.
Once again, Mr. President, I can report that there are no reservations for interpolation. It's a very simple bill. It is simply formalizing the authority of a barangay official to administer the oath of any official. It is something that we have already done traditionally, but there's nothing in the law that actually authorizes them. So we would like to institutionalize it and put it into the law, into the record, that they are in fact authorized to administer the oath.
Mr. President, since no one indicated their intention to interpolate, I move to close the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of committee amendments.
Any committee amendments, Senator Marcos?
We have no committee amendments, Mr.
There are
President.
no committee amendments.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is closed.
Mr. President, I'm sure we can give our colleagues a few days to have individual amendments if necessary. So I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2693 under Committee Report number 115.
As Senator Marcos said, this is not really something new. It's being done. It's just being formalized. If the majority leader has no objection and the minority leader would have no objection, can we consider approval on closure of the period of amendment, individual amendment, and proceed to approve this measure on second reading? This is to authorize the barangay chairman to administer the oath of public oath of office.
Mr. President, may I ask for a 1 minute
1 minute
suspension to ask
suspension.
the minority? I move to open the period of individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, no senator indicated their intention for individual amendments, so I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Yes, because we really need this law after the election of May 9.
It has become the practice, Mr. President, but strangely enough, although we have many of us here in various guises have sought the services of our punong barangay for to administer our oaths, we have not authorized them formally, and so I think it is time that we do that.
I can already imagine Senator Marcos making the pledge. Anyway.
I look forward to that, Mr. President. Thank you for your support.
All right. What is the motion?
There's a motion to close the period of individual
So
amendments. Mr. President, I move to approve this measure on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senate Bill number 2693 under Committee Report number 115 is hereby approved on second reading.
Section 5, Mr. President, this report message reads as follows. Non-Moro indigenous cultural communities. The rights of non-Moro indigenous cultural communities as provided for in Republic Act number 8371 or the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, IPRA, of 1997, and other related laws shall in no way be impaired, diluted, or diminished, even when such non-Moro indigenous cultural communities are situated within the confines of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. I was very curious when I read this, Mr. President. Why is there a need to provide this limitation of powers of this political entity known as the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in this wise, given the fact that IPRA is a national law.
27 yan.
Is the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region allowed to tinker with legislations passed by this Congress as an autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao in accordance with Article 10, Section 15 to 21 of the Constitution?
Certainly not, Mr. President. That is precisely why we have tried to strengthen this provision. In the original draft of the Bangsamoro Basic Law, all that it speaks of is, it is under Article 2, Section 2, in the original draft, titled Freedom of Choice, and it merely states, the freedom of choice of other indigenous peoples shall be respected. Now, when we conducted the hearings, the hearings which specifically allowed the indigenous peoples groups to come and make their opinions on the draft BBL known, they felt that this was not sufficient. And because of certain events and instances that had already happened, where the IPRA law was not as assiduously implemented or followed. The indigenous peoples had suffered loss of their ancestral lands, and even there are cases where in the process of certain groups coming in and taking that land away, that violence ensued, and there was fighting between the indigenous peoples and the various groups. And so they had asked us to make it very, very clear that the IPRA law still applies, even inside the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, and that the Bangsamoro government could not interfere, could not somehow amend or repeal or ignore the rights that are granted to the indigenous peoples in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. I take the gentleman's point that yes, there is a national, the IPRA is a national law, and again, the Bangsamoro Parliament cannot amend, cannot repeal that law as only an act of Congress can do that. And so, but still, on the ground, to be very, very clear as to what the position of the indigenous peoples are in terms of their ancestral lands, and again, the rights that they enjoy, they ask that we make it we repeat it, to assure them that the guarantees that are granted them by the IPRA law will continue even upon the creation of the Bangsamoro government.
But I understand that in spirit, this proposed measure or proposed political subdivision of the Republic, which is now going to be called Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, is in fact embracing the non-Islamic indigenous people living in the territory that they are asking to compose the territorial domain of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And why don't we just make a general provision that the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, the parliament of the legislative body, rather, better still, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and its organs cannot in any way amend, revise, or impair any national laws passed by Congress.
If we could put in language, I would certainly agree with that, Mr. President. But that is why we have there will be instances further along in the substitute bill that will have the same assurances, the same guarantees when it comes to the local government code, when it comes to monetary policy, when it comes to all of these areas, which in the original draft BBL, it would seem that the original draft would allow somehow the Bangsamoro Parliament to make those amendments of national law. And so again, because this was of great concern to many quarters, not just the indigenous people, but also local governments, also the Department of Finance, again, there are many instances of this. We wanted to repeat and to make sure it may be redundant, but it serves again, since as I have explained, this is not only a legal document, it is also a political one, and to make an assurance to those groups that the national law that applies to them will be respected and will be followed by the Bangsamoro government.
Well, I'm already actually anticipating an issue that I will raise when we discuss the question of power. Because my understanding of the general structure of this proposed law, in case of powers that can be exercised by the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, is that any power that is not restricted is within the power of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And this model is quite dangerous, because it is the national government that is restricting itself. It says, these are the powers that I will retain, and anything that I did not restrict here, it is within your jurisdiction to legislate on.
That is right. That was the same reaction that we had to the original draft BBL. So I think the principle that it simply needs to be followed are again on Article 10 of the Constitution. It is very clear which powers are devolved and shared by the Bangsamoro government, and by hewing strictly to that enumeration of powers, I think that we are on safe, solid ground.
That's correct, Mr. President. We will come to that. Under the American system, the federal government of the United States, the top structure is delegated with certain powers. The ramparts exercise all powers not delegated to the federal government. And it seems that this is the model that they are actually trying to copy, except that in the case of this proposed law, the national government will be the one saying, I will reserve all these powers, and anything that I did not reserve or I did not restrict is within your power to exercise, which I think is quite very liberal. So we will come to that. And I think that the framers of the Constitution were aware of the dangers of this political exercise, and that is why they constitutionally not enumerated the powers that could be delegated to the autonomous regions that they contemplated when they recommended the adoption of the 1987 Constitution to be limited only to those that were written in the Constitution. And so therefore, I will argue that this Congress is bereft of any power to enlarge what was constitutionally granted in the Constitution and was authorized by the Filipino people when they ratified that Constitution.
Quite so, Mr. President, and but we have approached the enumeration of shared powers and devolved powers from a different from the opposite perspective, actually, and have and said that if it is not granted in the Constitution, if it is not part of the enumeration of jurisdiction, that the Organic Act of Constitution cannot provide for legislation on anything that is not enumerated in Article 10, Section 20. But to return to the question of the indigenous peoples and the IPRA law, the question is, if you will note in Section 20, the number 3 in the enumeration of powers is ancestral domain and natural resources. The fear was that this would lead to some confusion, because in the Constitution, I believe it is what is being referred to are the ancestral lands of the Bangsamoro people, whereas in IPRA, it is the ancestral lands of the indigenous peoples. So there may be an instance where the interpretation would be that this power over ancestral domain and natural resources would include the ancestral lands of the indigenous peoples, and hence, once again, we chose to clarify it to assert that the IPRA law and the privileges and recognition that it grants the non-Moro indigenous peoples in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region are respected and maintained.
That is precisely what I'm concerned about, because unless we identify what are the ancestral land of the indigenous people, there will always be a conflict. And conflict of land is always a very touchy matter among ethnic groups. It has caused the turmoil, political turmoil and strategic turmoil in this planet. So I think we have to define it very clearly in order to prevent a seed of conflict to be planted in this globe.
Perhaps, Mr. President, we could make clear the distinction between the ancestral domain of Bangsamoro people and the ancestral lands of the indigenous peoples. And but again, the fact that the word ancestral belongs to both definitions that would lead to that may lead to some confusion with various interpretations to benefit whichever side of the conflict is making the argument.
This is a very clever way of drafting a law. Or the proposition that they were presenting is quite cleverly thought of, because before they were converted to Islam, they were indigenous people. Everybody in this land is indigenous in the beginning, and so they can equally argue later on when we are no longer around. We're not talking here of just a year, a decade, or several decades, but for all times, for as long as the Republic and that area exists. So they could equally argue that, well, that is why we included the indigenous people in this area. qualified one as the other. So this will be a source of problem.
I think we have. I think the gentleman has hit the nail on the head, we will be reduced to arguing over who is more indigenous than the other, who came first. In other words, and the discussions that we have had was again we came to that point when some of the proponents of the original draft would say, but the Bangsamoro people, as we have defined them, are the indigenous people in Muslim Mindanao. And of course, the tribal groups, the IPs, the non-Moro IPs, then argued in return, saying that, but we were there before you were, before Islam was there, and therefore we cannot be defined as Bangsamoro people. And we have ancestral lands, and our ancestral lands and the recognition of our ancestral lands must be respected. And that is why we made a distinction between the non-Moro indigenous peoples and the Bangsamoro people. Because to an extent, an argument could be made that the Bangsamoro people, as has been defined, can be regarded as indigenous peoples as well. And exactly this is precisely where the confusion started to manifest itself. And again, that is why we try to make it very clear that the non-Moro indigenous peoples and the IPRA law that protects them and their ancestral lands and their culture are recognized.
By the way, do we have any historical record to prove the period when Islam was introduced to this country, or at least in this part of the world? Because Islam started in the 7th century. And I'm sure that before that time, there must have been people in this land. And, so when Islam, the wave of Islam, when Europe as well as Central Asia, Asia and Southeast Asia, with their faith, they found these indigenous people and converted them. So there's a merger between the historical roots of both members of Islam in these parts of the world and those who do not believe in Islam.
I think the date the period rather that can be used as the beginning for the increasing influence of the Muslim faith in southern Mindanao can be traced back to the influx of these religious influences into Muslim Mindanao. Subsequent to that was the conversion of the locals, and I believe that was the process. I am trying to look back on our notes because this was something that we discussed also to try and find exactly what the Islamic historians have nailed down the precise, well, at least the area, the period in which what records we have shown that Islamism began to enter into what we now know as the Philippines.
Actually, Mr. President, the Prophet Muhammad was born between 1600 and 1700. That was the birth of when he became senador. He started advocating Islamism, and it spread into Europe, it spread into Central Asia, some parts of Southeast Asia, while Christianity came to us only in 1521.
That's right, Mr. President.
So,
I have
They were ahead.
we have a very rough period, and the best that we can do for now is that the Islamic scholars tell us that with their study, the Islam started, the Muslim faith started to come into to be influential in southern Mindanao, southern Philippines in the 14th century. But of course, the indigenous peoples will claim that, and I believe that they are correct to do so, that they were already here
14th century.
in the 14th century. So that was just before the Spanish came in.
Ottoman Empire.
I believe that probably, yes, it was still the Ottoman Empire that was exerting its
They
influence.
came because of this Spice Trade.
That's right, Mr. President.
Anyway, now, another thing, Mr. President, is this section protects non-Moro indigenous cultural communities, but it does not protect other non-Muslim, non-Moro indigenous people like Christians, there are Jews, Buddhists, Hinduists. By the way, Hinduism probably was ahead, no? Because there are signs of Hinduism in Indonesia.
Even in Hinduism and Buddhism, that the mix, there was at some point a very eclectic mix of Hinduism and Buddhism around Southeast Asia at the time, before the entry of before the influence of the Muslim faith became well felt in the Philippines. So again, since the historical record is not very precise, all that we can presume is that since the Spanish came in 1521 and slowly attempted to spread Christianity throughout the whole country, then at the time that they were trying to influence and convert those indigenous peoples or those inhabitants of Muslim Mindanao, there was of Mindanao, there were already Muslims, and that is why the Muslims fought back because they refused to be converted to Christianity. In any case, Mr. President, I would see it would seem to be whatever the precise dates and the number of years are, the non-Moro indigenous peoples came first. The Bangsamoro people, those following the Islamic faith, came afterwards, and finally the Spanish, I think, was the last major religious influence that came into
Now,
the
coming back to section 5, as I said, it protects non-Moro indigenous cultural communities, but it does not protect other non-Muslim, non-Moro indigenous people. And the question is why? Is this intentional and or a matter of legislative policy to be adopted through the enactment of this bill?
Well, it is again because there is a specific law for the indigenous peoples, i.e. the IPRA law. What we generally refer to now as settlers, Christian or otherwise, those who came after. They have their own, the law of the land protects them, but we have specific laws for the indigenous peoples, and we just wanted to be certain that the protections that are provided them are still, they will still enjoy within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. It was felt again that the settlers, Christians or otherwise, were sufficiently protected. They do not need special laws for themselves, for them, because they are citizens of the Philippines and enjoy the rights and privileges of every citizen. However, the IPs are a special case in that we need to do, and it was felt by Congress that an express, it must be expressly stated that we recognize, again, their history, their culture, their rituals, their tribal agrupations, and that certain those kind of concerns do not necessarily apply to settlers in what will be the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
So there is a possibility that we could tighten these provisions in order to protect Christians with lands within the areas that will be, if we pass this law, occupied by the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
If we would like to go back to the IPRA law and amend it in such a way that it is a more robust in its express recognition of the special case of the indigenous peoples, then certainly that would I think it
Well,
would.
I'm concerned about the Christians. In Maguindanao, there are Christians. In Lanao, there are also some spate of Christians. In Basilan, especially, the town of Isabela, the city of Isabela, and Lanita.
That is why, Mr. President, the provision that defines the Bangsamoro identity as seems to it has been inferred by many that the fact that there is a definition means that they again will enjoy different greater privileges than non-Bangsamoro within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, and hence this restatement and this that's why we felt we needed to stress restate exactly that that is not the case. That despite the fact that there is a definition, a category for Bangsamoro people, it does not accord them any special status in the law, even within Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
That is, you're correct, but there is a deeper significance in that provision dealing with the identity of the Bangsamoro people, because a nation is identified by its non-ethnic or religious identification mark, if I may use the word mark. That is precisely the problem in the past, in Europe, elsewhere in the modern world. They have to eliminate the American Indians and the South American Indians to remove the identity of these people. And now we are ourselves identifying a particular group and consider it a nation inside the Republic.
That is why, Mr. President, we have sought to remove any possible interpretation of the basic law that would define the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region as somehow with a state within a state. A great deal of the changes, the amendments that we have made, are precisely to address that misgiving, that concern that was expressed by not only legal experts but many other sectors who live within and around the proposed Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. It was the fundamental problem of the Bangsamoro basic.
When we come to the proper time, we will come back to this issue of identity. Now, Mr. President, am I correct in my understanding that the rights and privileges of non-Islamic people living in the area being proposed as the area of the Bangsamoro autonomy would be respected and governed by the Bill of Rights of the Constitution?
We must insist that it is. Again, these safeguards and measures and restatements are precisely to indicate that that is the intent in the basic law.
The Constitution includes especially the Bill of Rights will be operating in that area known as the area of the Bangsa Autonomous Region.
That is again that is something in the operation of the implementation of all the national laws that clearly has to be the bedrock of any creation any writing of a basic law, of an autonomous law, of an organic law, and that seemed to be somehow weakened in the basic law, in the draft bill, the draft Bangsamoro basic law, and that is that is something that we try to remedy by various means. One of them is the restatement once again of the national laws that that are based upon the respect and of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and of national laws that have flown from that.
Well, we have a lot of things to discuss from this point, but we will move along so that we can cover bigger ground. Now, Section 6. Section 6 deals with Bangsamoro symbol. And we are legislating in this law the flag, the emblem, the administrative seal, and the anthem of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And so my question is, have we ever done this? In the whole history of this Congress, in the case of our provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays, legislating their own emblem, their own flag, their administrative seal, and their anthem, if they have any anthem.
We have there are cases where most provinces, if not all provinces, have adopted a seal, have adopted a flag, have a provincial hymn or song, but we have never actually legislated it. But we felt that it was allowable because the Bangsamoro Autonomous Regions enjoys being an organic law, this being an organic law, the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and its government enjoy, shall we say, a place with the aforementioned asymmetry that we keep hearing about, a place that is, if the national government is at the top of our government structure, the local governments occupy their place. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region occupies a place somewhere in between there, in which they enjoy more autonomy, more powers are devolved them than an ordinary, quote unquote, LGU, but certainly not the same as the powers of the national government. And so to allow them that increased autonomy, it was felt that it would do no harm, since it effectively would be the same practice that is being adopted by most, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, all provinces and some cities, where they have the provincial song, they have a seal, they have a flag, and this would be similar. However, the point the gentleman is making is that we have to answer the question directly: we have not legislated that they be allowed to do so. As common practice, it has been adopted over time.
Why can we not, why can we not just follow the practice of that we have had instead of putting this in the law, which suggests to me that the real intent really is something else.
Well, Mr. President, I think that again, since it is a common practice with other LGUs, it will not make in any way the Bangsamoro Autonomous distinct or threaten in any way the position of the national government vis-a-vis the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. However, the fact that it is being legislated, perhaps therein lies the difference, and I do not see that it would be necessary. I think perhaps I can only surmise that it is an expression of the additional autonomy that the Bangsamoro region enjoys.
Well, on the other hand, other audiences that observe us as a national community might take the impression that we have indeed recognized the existence of a separate nationality within our republic and invested them with the trappings of a state, even though this bill is silent. Because only states have flags to symbolize the sovereignty of the nation. That's the symbol of the nation. We die for that flag. We have a national anthem which have been sung before we open the session this afternoon. And then we have the seal that is impressed on our official historical documents in order to establish the continuity of our people and so many other things. Now, if we are going to give all of this, then in effect, we are building the aura of a nation, of a state, although it is tied up with us in a strenuous manner. They have the economic strength and military strength in some future time, then they'll say, you are the ones who gave us all of this. You recognize us. You were the first to recognize our identity, our separateness from the whole, and now we say goodbye.
It is that possible. It will be possible in the future that from the reading and once again of the proposed draft BBL that it would be allowable or possible or it would encourage the Bangsamoro government to assert its independence from the Republic of the Philippines, and that's why we have tried to put in the safeguards. To return and expand on the point of the practice of local government units, the difference in what we have in the local government code is in the local government code. It states the local government units may continue using, modify, or change their existing corporate seals. They may create their own corporate seals. It shall be registered to part of the local government, and any change should be approved. And any government entity, including the military, this is RA 8491, may adopt appropriate coat of arms, administrative seals, logo, insignia, badges, patches, and banners, and initiate awards, orders, or declarations may be authorized by Congress or the Office of the President. In this case, we are in this form of legislation, the language is much more assertive. The Bangsamoro Parliament in Section 3, it reads in the original, the Bangsamoro Parliament shall adopt the official flag, emblem, and anthem of the Bangsamoro. This has been amended to read now in the substitute bill.
It is mandatory.
Yes, it is mandatory.
Yeah.
That is the essential difference.
Maybe we should follow the wording of the local government code.
We can very easily change shall to may, Mr. President.
All right. Now, my question is, will the national flag of the Republic be hoisted every day in all government buildings, public buildings, monuments, other public places in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region?
No, sir. There is no language. No, Mr. President. There is no language in the basic law that mandates the raising of the flag in public facilities, in public buildings. We have not made any mention of that.
Is the flag law operational
Almost certainly, Mr. President.
in the Bangsamoro?
Yes, Mr. President. Of course, it is a national law, and
No, it's operational. That is what the flag law says, that the flag must be hoisted in public buildings.
furthermore, Mr. President, it must fly higher than any other flag.
Correct, that's right.
And that certainly would still apply to the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
I assume that given the tendency of this autonomous region as a higher level of being a political subdivision of the Republic, that they will also have parades, have some political activities. And if so, if their flag is hoisted and the Philippine flag as provided in the flag law must be also hoisted, which flag has the place of honor?
Well, Mr. President, the flag law would still apply, and no other symbol or flag can fly higher than the national flag, and the place of honor belongs to the Philippine flag.
So the flag of the Republic must always set the place of honor.
That should certainly be the case.
In the singing of the national anthem, their anthem and the anthem of the Republic, which will be sung first?
The national anthem will be sung first.
The national anthem. Do they register coastwise or ocean-going vessels?
No,
Are they authorized to do that?
They do not have that authority.
They do not have the authority to register.
They cannot flag. They cannot flag their vessels that fly international waters as a Bangsamoro vessel. It can either be Philippines or any other flag to any other sovereign nation.
But within their assigned waters, they have a coastwise strait.
Well, it would be akin. We would then fall back onto the identification of boats that are registered within a certain municipality. As I'm sure the gentleman knows, the color scheme, for example, of bankas that are registered in a certain municipality, that can be mandated, so they are clearly identifiable as having registered in a certain town, in a certain city, in a certain, and that would be again what we would apply when they are local, when they are, for example, local fishing boats that only ply local waters and not international.
Section 7 deals with traditional Islamic institutions. What are these traditional Islamic institutions operating in our in Mindanao?
This refers to mostly the sultanates and the royal houses.
The Sultanate.
The sultanates and the royal houses that are the traditional institutions in Muslim Mindanao.
Do we have a listing of the sultanates in Mindanao and the royal houses?
We have an embarrassment of riches in terms of listing, Mr. President. They do not necessarily, one list does not necessarily agree with another. And within the sultanates, there are sects, factions that are recognized. There are pretenders to the throne that remain as pretenders to the throne. It is a very, from our point of view, it is a relatively informal structure within the sultanates. It is, again, it is akin to what we have seen in past history in the royal houses in countries in Europe, for example, where there is often a conflict as to who should sit on the throne. Those conflicts are continuing to go on, thankfully for the most part peacefully in Muslim Mindanao. But the reason that we have included this is upon the request of the sultanates, because one of the fundamental weaknesses that we felt that the Bangsamoro, the process of the writing of the Bangsamoro Basic Law was the lack of consultation with different sectors. One of those sectors was the Sultanate. And it was felt that the Sultanate still occupied and still played an important role, especially in the resolution of conflict within the tribe. And that is something that we still felt should be applied, as it is recognized by the members of a sultanate or the subjects of a royal house, and it has in the past been effective in that function. Furthermore, it is again a continuing recognition. If we are going to say that we recognize the differences in culture and history and religion and law of the Bangsamoro, then we must, to be consistent, also recognize the differences and the distinct cultural heritage, again, the history, the operation of their internal laws, so long as they are not in violation with any of our national laws. So that is why this section was included, to give the Sultanate to recognize and to define the part that the Sultanates will still need to play if the system is going to function smoothly. Because, as I said, this has been in practice for hundreds of years, and it is one that is recognized by the members of the different houses, and it would be of great assistance not only to the Bangsamoro government, but also to the national government, should the Sultanates continue to play that role.
Yes. I can ask that question because I'm wondering whether the Sultanate as an Islamic institution has a special function in their society. And in my travels in Mindanao, I have heard of Sultan Kudarat, Sultan Sabaromis, the Royal House of Baloy, and many others. And then, do they occupy a specific areas as sultans?
Yes, they do. The Sultanates have a very well-defined territory. Most of them have a well-defined territory. Of course, the largest and most prominent is the Sultanate of Sulu and they do have areas that, that they, in the past,